Welcome to the final episode of our Tab Cares podcast series. Today, Ryan Jones helps us navigate the delicate process of moving forward after loss. We'll explore how sudden reminders can reignite grief and discuss strategies for managing these emotional setbacks. Join us as we learn not just to cope, but to find strength and continuity in the face of grief. Stay tuned as we take a heartfelt look at these personal journeys and share insights on embracing life after loss.
Welcome, everyone. This is episode 3 of the 3-episode series of how to handle and process grief. If you've seen the first 2 episodes, thank you for sticking with me through this series. If this is your first episode, welcome. I will reintroduce myself. My name is Ryan Jones. I am an academic advisor for the Ogden College of Science and Engineering here at WKU, which is Western Kentucky University. I received my undergraduate degree in psychology in the fall of 2019 and my master's degree in the spring of 2022 in student affairs and higher education, also here at Western Kentucky University. While getting that degree, I worked at Rivendell Behavioral Psychiatric Hospital for 3 years. And this is kind of where I learned and practiced some of this information. So with that being said, let's get started with the first caller's question.
I recently lost my pet, who was like family to me. I'm struggling with the depth of this grief. How do I cope with losing an animal companion that was such a big part of my life?
Thank you for taking the time to call and asking that, important question. So since this episode is really about strategies for coping and kind of getting to the acceptance stage, this is definitely a good and important question. So because many people believe that the grief process only involves the loss of a human, it's widely dispelled or not talked about when people were like going through the grief process due to the loss of a pet. So pets more often than not are seen as members of the family, and given how much comfort pets bring to us, it's understandable that losing them can be emotionally devastating. A lot of times we talk about the term unconditional love. We see that a lot with our pets. Losing this unconditional love is understandably very difficult. As humans, we need to feel that love and connection and to know that something views you in such a special way. That's why it becomes so painful when we experience the loss of a pet. So how do we cope with that loss? Well, first, of course, acknowledge that your feelings are valid and recognize that grief looks different for everyone, even when it's the death of someone who may not have been human. One common way that I have noticed when people cope with the loss of a pet is by creating a physical memorial. So one common worry is that by moving on from the previous pet with such memorial, it's like that they feel that they are forgotten or that they're just moving on. It was just a pet. They couldn't have meant that much. That's absolutely not the case. This memorial will actually do the opposite of that, and it will serve as a way to keep their legacy alive. And the memorial doesn't necessarily have to be anything great. If the picture of the animal is too much, if they have them, I've seen people just put their paw print on a piece of paper, something like that. If they have something like that for record purposes, and that is also a way that the memorial doesn't overwhelm you, but also serves the purpose of keeping that legacy alive. Moving to the second caller's question.
My young child passed away, and I'm haunted by the future we won't have together. How do parents move forward from losing a child and the dreams they had for them?
So First and foremost, I'm sorry that you've had to experience a loss such as this. Couldn't even begin to imagine what you're feeling and what you've been through. Um, my first inclinations to help begin the process of moving forward would be to stick together. Stick together as a couple, stick together as a family, and lean on each other for help. While everyone in the family will ultimately need to have their private time to grieve, you also can find comfort in one another. Being together can help you remember that you are not alone in your grief. And then using the strength of use the strength of your family's sense of belonging to help you manage your sorrows. So be there to consistently support one another and again, to lean into one another, because when you're dealing with the loss of a child, especially a young child, it's a sorrow that we just normally don't even think or fathom that we will ever feel. So that brings me to the second part of your question. So as far as the dreams go, there really isn't a surefire way to dispel these thoughts other than to truly give them to God and understand that ultimately it's His will that has to be done. And I understand that is a very tough thing to comprehend, but we must understand that no matter what our plans that we thought were going to happen, or that how much we aspired for them to happen, it may just not have been in the plan for that to come to fruition. And like I said, I understand how tough it can be to come to terms with this, because again, that's just a thought that never enters into our mind, that we could possibly lose our child. That's just never a thought we ever would think of. So when it happens, we literally have no idea what we're going to do about it. Because nobody ever wants to think of something as horrible as the loss of their own child. And that's just the God's honest truth. So as far as that goes, again, there really will, and it's possible that there will literally be no answer that is sufficient enough for you, and that is okay. And that's okay. And understanding and accepting that that's okay will be one of the first steps to getting to that acceptance stage. So for caller number 3.
I cared for my aunt during her long illness, and it became my life. Now that she's gone, I feel lost and unsure about what to do with my life. How do I find a new purpose?
Thank you for your question. So loss of any type, whether it be a divorce, job termination, the end of a friendship that you helped dear, or the death of a loved one, can send you reeling into uncharted territory. For some, it means the loss of an identity. As you've said, you looked after your aunt as she was going through this illness, and ultimately she passed on. Loss is very painful. So even thinking about it can give you a knot in your stomach and a lump in your throat. And yet you do desire to shift your energy, mind, and heart towards a different direction. In other words, what can you do to begin to create the life that you want after your devastating loss and after you've been going through this pattern of helping them try to get to a better place? First, work on setting a small goal that is obtainable to achieve. I say this because goal setting is important, because, and this might not be necessarily the case for you, but for others, your self-esteem likely took a major hit when this loss occurred. At some level, you thought you were able to control things, and then ultimately we find out that we couldn't. So setting a goal and being able to achieve it will help you see that you still have control over some things. Lastly, begin to observe your own thoughts. Our mind is a very, very powerful place. So begin to monitor this. Don't judge your thoughts, just observe. Do you find yourself dwelling on the loss? Do you find yourself talking about some aspects of the loss in many of your conversations? Are you engaging in critical self-talks or things such as that? So our thoughts influence our actions, and many times we are unaware of what we are thinking until we begin to observe our thoughts. So you be in the habit of negative self-talk, you don't even realize that you engage in this behavior several times a day. So you can't change something that you are not aware of. So getting an accurate picture of your thoughts is important. And especially in your case, when you were with your family member as they progressively, I guess, got worse with their illness and then eventually passed on, you may not realize it, but there is such a thing as the pre-grief processing. If you've ever dealt with anybody who was dealing with some type of terminal illness and they've only had limited time, we tend to find ourselves really going through the bargaining stage as that process is happening, where they're starting to fail to their illness. So that it's likely that you could have been going through the grief process way before your family member passed. And I hate that for you, because, like you said, you kind of got into that pattern, and now that your family member is gone, what do you do? So some of those exercises that I just talked about will help you kind of get back on track and kind of get to some normalcy, if you will. All right. So for caller number 4's question.
After my partner died, I've been debating whether to move out of our house or change their things. Is there a right time for this? And what about starting a new relationship?
Okay. That's a good question. Thank you for it. Thank you. So there is no right way to feel after losing your spouse. So many variables contribute to your reaction to losing your spouse. This includes how long and happy your marriage was, how your spouse passed away, how old your children are if you have them, and how dependent you were on one another. As far as moving out of the house goes, it should only be done when you are ready. Moving houses by itself, just moving in general, is stressful enough, but when it's compounded with the loss of a loved one, it can become unbearable if you're not mentally ready to take that step. And I say that to say this: so while it's crucial that you institute self-care during the grief process, it may be difficult to do so when you're surrounded by constant memories and reminders. It just makes it difficult to kind of get to that accepting stage for some people, which is why ultimately moving out of that house may be what's best for you when you're ready. So relocating to a different area, even if it's close by, can be the springboard you need to get a fresh start. This doesn't mean that you'll forget them, of course, but it'll open the door for new experiences, and you'll have the opportunity to create a place of peace. The same goes with the second part of the question. The same goes with starting a new relationship. It's best to not be grieving still when dating, because inevitably you won't be able to give your full self to that relationship while you're still longing for what was. Okay, because I know a lot of times, and this is really it is up to preference. Some people, when they lose their spouse, they never remarry, they never date again, and that's totally within their right. But understand that if you do long for that relationship feeling again, then it's not disrespectful. It's not necessarily a negative thing for you to move forward if you're ready. If you're ready, that is the only caveat. If you are ready, because life is life, and we all deserve some sort of happiness if we can obtain it. And if that is what's going to ultimately get you back to being happy, then go for it. But again, you have to be ready to give your full self to that relationship. And that ultimately means accepting the laws of a loved one. Right? Caller number 5's question.
Certain places or smells trigger memories of my deceased brother, causing me to feel like I'm regressing in my grief. Is this a normal part of the grieving process?
Okay, so this is a good question, one that is frequently asked. So thank you. I know you're likely not the only one that's had this question. So there is actually a term for this phenomenon, and it's called grief triggers. So grief triggers are anything that causes you to revert into your grief without warning. So sudden and intense feelings of distress, pain, and sorrow usually accompany this. Some of the more common triggers that we normally hear are milestone dates like birthdays, anniversaries, certain holidays that you had traditions on, or in your case, certain smells or certain places where you've created memories. So to get around, well, not necessarily to get around this, but to help cope with this, we were taught that trying to hide how you feel from yourself and others only prolongs the grief process, right? Acceptance of your loss, your feelings, and emotions will help you understand when these emotions come up seemingly out of nowhere, all right? So it's all a part of the grief reaction to loss, and in time, it'll naturally become second nature to feel, accept, and let go of these waves of grief. And in some cases, once you get to this acceptance of that loss, instead of these smells and places triggering your grief, it'll trigger your acceptance, and it'll turn from a sad memory to a happy memory, if that makes sense, where you're thinking, I remember the time when we did this, and I smell the time, which ultimately, yes, it can bring you, thoughts of sadness, but ultimately, once you get to that acceptance, it'll bring feelings of thankfulness that you got to experience this with your loved one. And this is caller number 6 question. I believe this is the last question.
I find myself breaking down at unexpected times, especially when I come across things that belong to my late friend. How do I deal with these emotional setbacks and continue to move forward?
Again, thank you. Thank you for calling in with that question. Thank you for being open and transparent with what you're going through. And again, my condolences to you and your family. So a setback or disappointment can be particularly devastating because we feel emotions so intensely that when faced with the death of a loved one or misfortune of any kind, it can shake us to our core. The hardest part about coping with any negative experience is the feelings it generates in us. It's the hurt, the sadness, the guilt, embarrassment, rejection, humiliation, whatever it may be, and the sense of loss that can feel so overwhelming when we fear it will destroy us. Hiding your feelings and avoiding your disappointment, pretending that you're okay, are all ways of trying to keep the hurt you really feel at bay so that you don't have to hurt so much. But unfortunately, avoidance strategies, they never work. They never work for long. The painful feelings tend to increase the longer you avoid them. and you end up spending increasing amounts of time and energy trying to keep them under wraps. I know a lot of us, of course, most of us have been through school or are currently in school. It's like procrastinating on your homework and then feeling overwhelmed when the due date's here. Our emotions are the same way. They can take over if you don't take care of them. So what should you do to dispel this? First and foremost, be gentle with yourself. Let yourself feel whatever it is you are feeling, all right? Don't be in a hurry to be okay. Give yourself time to think. All these things that you're going to be trying to figure out is going to help you with your self-awareness, which is why, of course, I started with be gentle with yourself, because once you start down this path, I mean, it's easy to be hard on ourselves, especially when we start to bottle these emotions up. And you have to understand that it was just a part of your journey. All right. So once you have given yourself the time and the freedom to acknowledge and express your feelings, try to learn from the experience. All right. So whatever the situation is that you're going through, there is usually some kind of insight that you can gain about yourself or life or a certain situation. All right. So at some point when it feels that you've written all you can write, when you've wept and said all you can say, the experience will fade into the past while you move into the future. Okay? So expressing your feelings and learning from life will allow you to move forward, and it'll allow this forward motion to happen naturally. The next step is the one that you take yourself. Once you've faced your feelings, grieved your loss, and perhaps learned a lesson or two along the way, you can take action. If life has left you feeling victimized by its cruelty or unfairness, this is the time to stop and decide where you want to go next. Always remember that it is your choice, and when you are ready, that is when you decide to move forward. Okay? This kind of goes back to if you're a believer of God giving us that free will, this is connected somewhat to that, as far as us having that choice to move forward when we're ready. And I say when we're ready because, again, there is no timetable for that. There is no timetable that I could give you saying, okay, it's been 3 weeks, you should be at this point. That's just not how that works. So given everything that I previously said with these exercises, do those at your pace, but do them consistently. And you should start seeing some of those feelings start to go away, and you can get to that acceptance stage a little bit easier. All right. So I believe that was the last caller's question. This marks the end of a 3-episode series, but we could go on really forever about this on this topic, just because it's such an important one that we're all going to have to deal with at some or have had to deal with at some point. Again, I pray that you all just find peace with whatever you're going through. Again, I will always send my condolences to your families, as nobody ever wants to have to deal with something along the lines of the death of a loved one. But it's just something that it's unavoidable for a lot of us. So I thank you all for sticking with this series, and I hope you all have a blessed day. Thank you.